Okej. Witajcie, witam wszystkich serdecznie, dobry wieczór. Witam na webinarze z Polem Bankerem. No i tak jak na poprzednim webinarze, po zakończeniu utworzę napisy w języku polskim, także dla tych z Was, którzy po angielsku nie ogarną tematu, będziecie mogli obejrzeć ten webinar z polskimi napisami. Póki co webinar będzie po angielsku, także no cóż, przekazuję tutaj głos naszemu gościowi i bawcie się dobrze. Okay, Paul, hello. So
hello.
I have just said that this webinar will be in English, and after all, I will do the transcription and put the Polish subtitles on. But so far for today, we proceed in English. So, okay, I'm leaving you now. I will switch off my camera and my microphone, but I will stay in the background. So if, in any case, I will be here to help.
Okay. Well, thank you for the invite. Thank you everyone for joining us either live or if you're watching this as a recording. I'm going to turn off my video in a moment when I start the presentation to make sure that we save bandwidth on the internet and to make sure there's no problems with the recording. All right, so today's presentation, I decided to talk about marker training. And I use markers, I use clickers. As you can see in the photograph here, that is one of my clickers. But also those people that train with me on my seminars know that, you know, I tell people to use markers and I prefer a clicker. And we will talk about that, why I prefer clickers in this presentation. But also it is important I point out right at the start that the marker does not have to be a clicker. So when I say the word clicker during this presentation, it's generic term that I'm using for a marker. So if I say clicker, please replace that word with whatever marker you use. It's just natural for me to use the word clicker rather than marker. Many, many years ago, as a dog trainer in the military, I was in charge of a landmine detection program for the Balkans, Bosnia predominantly, and we moved into Kosovo a little bit. And part of this program required the dogs to search a path of ground, which was 1 meter wide, 50 meters long. And they had to search every inch of the ground looking for a landmine. Now, on the right-hand side, that's me working my detection dog, Arnie. And we built these racks. This is, in 1999. We built these racks and we imprinted the dogs on 0.025% of TNT, or milligrams of TNT. And then we mixed that TNT with sand or grass or soil and different odors. And the dogs had to discriminate the sand which contained TNT from the sand that didn't, or soil or grass, whatever we were using. You can notice there that I'm using this is a mine probe. It's a prodder that we use to prod the ground to actually look for the landmines when a dog responds or we're searching without dogs. On the end of that prodder, on the right-hand side at the dog's nose, in the photo where its nose is on one of the tins, on the prodder is an actual cork, and that's a wine cork. So what I did was train the dogs to follow the cork, and now I can dictate where the dog searches in the ground. And that means when we go outside and work the dogs, we search every inch of the ground by pointing the prodder along the ground in a zigzag fashion, and the dog's nose follows it until it finds the smell of a landmine. But to enable us to do this, I introduced clicker training to the military. And at the time, I was very skeptical about clicker training and how useful it was. But after I introduced it into this program, I realized what an advantage it was to use clickers. And again, clickers can be any marker. We just use clickers. And in this presentation, I'm going to discuss the techniques I used to train the dogs for markers, what I'm looking for in the dogs to understand with markers, how I use them, and how I use such tools as reward selection to ensure that the markers are really powerful. And I think once you have a dog that is trained on markers, you have a really powerful tool that you can utilize, particularly in detection training, but in any training. But this focus will be detection because that's primarily what I do. So what is a marker? Well, if we think about classical conditioning, it's a positive marker equals a conditioned reinforcer since the neutral stimuli, the marker, is paired with an unconditioned neutral reinforcer until that stimuli produces a similar emotion response from the dog. That's a lot of verbiage. That is the scientific technical term. Basically, we are pairing the marker with a reward, with a reinforcer, which is something which is pleasant. So the dog learns that sound or vibration or whatever we decide to use is reinforcing. And you can term this process as bridging, secondary marker, clear communication signal, CCS, or just a marker. I use marker or clicker for that term. And basically it's this signal to the dog that it is correct and a reward will follow. So there is science behind this. It is, there's obviously a lot of science speak there. But if we talk about it in a basic dog training term, it's something which indicates to the dog the behavior that you desire has been achieved, and now you are going to receive a reward. So why use a marker? Well, there's lots of reasons why it's beneficial to use a marker. The first one is it proves an effective tool to communicate to the canine when a desired behavior has been achieved. The actual instant that the dog achieves a behavior you want, you can mark it straight away. You don't have to be at the dog. You don't have to be close to the dog, close enough for it to hear or see the marker, but you don't have to be right on top of the dog. You don't have to throw a reward that gets there at the same time. The moment you mark, then the dog knows, okay, that piece of behavior I just did is reinforceable. I am going to get a reward. It is more accurate at communication than direct rewarding. Direct rewarding would be throwing a ball, for instance, at the source of an odor. So when a dog sniffs odor, I can use a mark, click, the instant it sniffs. If I was to rely on throwing its reward at the source of the odor, by the time the dog has reached the odor, sniffed, I've thrown the reward, it's traveled through the air and got there, the dog may have turned its head and moved away. Now we're potentially reinforcing the dog, sniff odor, move my head, and then my reinforcement arrives. And that's not what we want to happen, obviously. Thirdly, it increases the distance between the trainer and the dog. And this can increase independence. It also gets the dog used to the fact that I respond at distance from the trainer. The trainer doesn't have to be next to me to deliver a reward by dropping a ball at the source or pointing to the source. That distance, that independence starts to be built very early in the training process and continues throughout the training. It reduces reward odor around the target. So if you're training more than one dog, for instance, and the first dog responds and a Kong is thrown in as its reward, the potential is that you leave some Kong residue odor next to the target. So when the next dog comes into that training scenario, it smells, there's some Kong smell here. Oh, and there's my target. And it gives a response. Again, a Kong is thrown or a tennis ball, and it introduces more reward smell into the area. Well, if we use in markers, we don't introduce any reward next to the odor because the dog is rewarded away from source. So we reduce in that odor, that reward odor, and disturbance of the reward being thrown into the target around the odor area. Next, it indicates to the canine that the training session has been complete and reinforcement which will follow. So when I use a marker, it is the point at which the desired behavior has been achieved. Now game is over and you're going to play and you get your downtime, because as soon as you hear that mark, click, then you know that you've achieved everything you need to achieve to get your reward. It also provides me, the instructor or trainer, a clear communication tool for all the canines. And what I'm talking about here is that I can, if I'm using a clicker, which I clicker train all my dogs, I can take the clicker and have the handler handle the dog. And then I can operate the clicker at the desired time that the behavior we're looking for has been achieved. The handler can concentrate on actually handling the dog, looking for those changing behaviors, trying to learn when that click happens, that's when the desired behavior has been achieved. So I'm taking away all the stress from that handler of when should I click? Should I click now? Is this the right time? And worrying about making mistakes, because now they just have to concentrate on the handling. And I know that I can operate the clicker at the right time. I'm not worried about how I'm handling the dog and all those other things. So together we achieve a much clearer training session than the handler being stressed and clicking at the wrong time and now confusing the dog potentially. The other reason I like to train all my dogs on clicker when they start any training program, and that's whether they're going to use the clicker later in their training program or not, is that it sets the brain up to start to learn. So the clicker training process or marker training process actually starts the dopamine rushing. It starts the dog to learn, okay, in this environment, when this happens, we are learning things. There's an opportunity for me to actually receive a reinforcer, to receive a treat, to receive a play with my ball. And it gets their brain switching on to learning. And they understand this is a learning environment. When I'm with this person and they do this startup ritual, we are going to start to learn, and I get an opportunity to get a reinforcement. And it's that dopamine rush I want to start. I want to get the dopamine running in the dog's brain because that accelerates the learning process. And I want the dog to feel good. I want it to get enjoyment out of training and desire to get back into that training room and actually continue training because it feels good. And it teaches the training concepts of lure, shape, and capture. So when I do clicker training, as soon as the dog has been imprinted on the clicker or charged to the clicker, whatever you want to call it, I then teach some behaviors which are lure, shape, and capture. Now, later in the training process, I can use those 3 techniques to train my dog. And I do this during the imprint process as well. So that's the main reasons that I use a marker. There might be some other smaller ones, but they are very important reasons and advantages to using a marker. And actually, when we receive dogs in training, they have 3 days to decompress. During those 3 days, we just walk the dogs, we get them used to kennel routine, they get enrichment in their kennels, they get wobblers to eat their meals from. We start to relax those dogs as soon as they get in. But after 3 days, they start training. And the very first training session they go in is clicker training. We start with clicker training for 2 days, and that's all they do. They also do, a reward selection process as part of that, but also clicker training is how we introduce training. It's how we introduce the training lab. It's how we introduce us as positive elements in their life and controlling those training environments. So the first step is this marker training or clicker training. Now this offers, or it opens up 2 questions. Do I use direct reward or do I use indirect reward? Well, I use both. All the dogs that we train are taught both direct and indirect reward. And I'll talk about what they are now. So the first video, this is direct reward. And what direct reward means is I am rewarding at the source. I'm rewarding wherever the behavior occurred. This is me in Canada with my dog Kay, a former dog I had, doing oil detection after a spill. This is real time. This is me holding a GoPro as we're on a real life search. So I have no idea where the oil is. I'm just filming as we go along. She's given a response. And in this case, I give her orange Kong, which is a floatable Kong. This is the same day, further down the same river. So I see a change in behavior. She moves forward. She smells some environment and she gives a response. And in this case, I'm rewarding her with, that's a chucker ball. And I'm just throwing it in at the source. And on this one, I actually move into the source. There it is on a washed up stick, some oil, and I give her a tennis ball. But in all these cases, I'm rewarding at source. I'm throwing the reward into source, or in the last clip, the last case, I actually walk up to the location and I drop the ball at source. But in all the cases, the reward is at source. So the next one is indirect. Poppy responds, click, and she comes back for a reward. One more time. So in that case, I'm indirect rewarding in that I'm using a marker to indicate she's correct. And then she has to move back to me to receive her reward, whether that reward is a treat or I'll give her a toy, but I'll now reward her away from the source of the target. Now I train all the dogs to accept both types of technique. And the reason for this is I now have an option in the field. In real life, it might be too dangerous to use a direct reward. I might not want to throw the ball into an environment where the dog's going to start jumping around and actually trying to fetch its ball or play with it. Or it might be that I use a Kong and it bounces off into the river, into a dangerous situation I don't want the dog in. So I now have the option that I can use an indirect, I can use a marker, and the dog will run back to me away from that environment I don't want to reward at source. But also maybe the target is delicate. Maybe the target is some scat or a frog. I don't want that dog to be jumping around chasing its toy if I'm using direct reward. So again, I have the option to use an indirect reward. The dog moves away from the target and I reward away. Then we can approach actually more carefully and obviously deal with whatever the target was. So there's advantages to both, and I train my dogs to accept both. Just as I train the dogs to use variable rewards, that'll be toys and food. Now, if the dog doesn't accept food, fine. We don't force it. If the dog doesn't accept toys, fine. Again, we don't force it, but through reward selection, we know which is its favorites, and I'll talk about reward selection in a moment. We know which is its favorites, but really, I want the ability to use both treats and toys. And the reason is, on this river, in one day, I had 183 confirmed alerts from that dog K, and I cannot reward the dog 183 times with a toy, with a Kong or a ball or something, because after 50 times or less, the dog's going to be tired and fed up with chasing the ball. Also, you know, on these days, I want to stress that we cover 8 to 12 miles. The dog might do up to 20 miles of actual search area, because you can see she's weaving left and right along this shoreline. I'm just walking in a straight line. So we cover a lot of ground, as well as a lot of fines, and obviously she's receiving a lot of rewards. So if I can give her a piece of cheese or a piece of chicken, then she's still receiving a reward. It disappears quick. It's not going to fill her up, but she wants to keep working for a jackpot, a toy, so she'll keep working. And I can maintain duration of search by manipulating the rewards I use. So a couple of principles there is that I use direct and indirect with all my dogs, and I also use variable reward with all my dogs if they'll accept it. So what are the types of markers? Well, there's verbal marker, and this is probably the one I hear the most, whether that's yes, super, I know is used a lot, bravo, used a lot in Poland, but any verbal marker that you actually use and you pair that with you are correct. The clicker, obviously you all know, that photo is actually the first ever clicker that I received way back in the 90s, and I still have it today. You can use a whistle, and you saw on the opening slide maybe that there was a small whistle there. I actually use whistles for directionals, but it can be used, you pair it and make it a marker. You can use a vibration collar, and this might be useful for a dog that's deaf, or it can be useful in tactical situations where you don't want to use sound, and you pair the vibration with a positive reinforcement. And now the dog learns, okay, when I feel the vibrate, behavior is over and I'm getting a reward. You can use a tone on a collar. So some collars, my Garmin Alpha 100 and 300 have tones, I think. Yeah, they do have tones, but they also have vibration. But you can use tone collars, and you pair the tone that's on the collar, again, with a reinforcer. So you can use anything you want, really, that is useful in the field that you can pair with a reinforcer. You can pair it with a reward, a positive experience. But try and use something that the dog does not encounter every day as part of its life. And I do see this a lot. People use yes as their marker word. But the problem is when we go out and we set up a problem, and then I call the handler up and say, okay, are you ready for this search? Yes. Have you brought your reward? Yes. Okay, this is your search. Do you understand? Yes. Okay, that person has just used their dog's marker 3 times, and their dog is sat next to him. And not once has it been reinforced. So what we're doing is we're diluting the power of the marker. And I don't want it diluted. I want that marker to be so strong and powerful that when the dog hears it, it bolts back to me in anticipation it's going to receive its reward. Not turns and looks and, well, is it now I'm getting it? Or are you just talking again? Is my sound going off all the time? Or is this the time that I get my reinforcement? So again, that's why I use the clicker, because it's not part of everyday routine life. The dog only hears it when it's going to receive a reward, and that makes it much more powerful rather than a word like yes. Now, you could pick a word that the dog wouldn't hear every day. So maybe a foreign word, maybe a word that's obscure, maybe a word that's not used much. So you could pick a word like that. Christina, the training partner in my company, uses a word top for her dog, which isn't necessarily used every day in the dog's life, but it's something she can make into a marker. So the marker can be really anything that you're able to pair with a reward or reinforcer. So does the use of a clicker or a marker produce better dogs? No. It doesn't produce better dogs. And there is research, there's the paragraph there, that looked into this. And we're not saying that actually the clicker itself makes the dog any better than it would be with using any marker, or maybe not using a marker at all. It doesn't mean that the dog malacrously becomes a better dog. But what we're saying is it gives a clear communication tool that can make your training better. It can make your training clearer. It can make it go forward more productively and potentially go forward more quicker, because the communication is a lot clearer. Timing is a lot better. So while it doesn't make the dog better, what it can do is make your training improved. So charging the marker, it's sometimes termed bridging, pairing, imprinting, loading. And I make a note there about charging. Some people use the term charged to indicate the point at which the dopamine buzz occurs on the mark, and that is the point of charge. You can use any of this technique, any of this verbiage, and there might be other verbiage that people use. In the dog community, people use lots of different terms for the same thing. But basically, we're saying we're making the association between the mark and reinforcement. And what you call that, whether you call it bridging, charging, pairing, imprinting, loading, or something else, it's irrelevant. It doesn't matter to the dog. All the dog cares about is the sound and the consequence of what that is. Remember, I talk about, or those that have heard me talk, Thorndike's law of effect. Every behavior has a consequence. And if the consequence of the behavior is the mark, and the consequence of the mark is a reinforcement that it really likes, then it's going to be reinforced. It's going to be something that's imprinted, that's it's permanent in the dog's mind. So here we start the imprint process. This is how we do it. There's lots of different ways. This is a dog, Bertie, who's operational in Laos. And basically, we're just throwing some treats out. We use high-value treats, so dehydrated chin hearts, cheese, chicken, and we just throw them around. And then just as the dog's about to eat that treat, we click. And that's the simple process I use to start this, to start imprinting the or charging the clicker. We do this for about 2 or 3, maybe 4 sessions. And what we're looking for is the dog starts to anticipate the click happening and obviously the treat. The next step then is we want to confirm the dog understands the charge. There. So we allow the dog to run around, not pay attention, not do anything. And when we use the clicker, in this case as the marker, we want that 180-degree head snap, spin, and look. Watch it again. That's exactly what I'm looking for to know my dog is charged to the mark. And we're not doing anything. We're ignoring the dog. We're allowing it just to run around at this point, at this stage. And we're looking for that. Now, this is only like day 2. This is just the confirmation exercise to say my dog understands the mark. It's as simple as that. As soon as the dog does that head snap and look towards where the reward is coming, the reinforcer, the reward is coming from, then we're ready to start using that marker within our training process. But I don't progress the dog into training until I get that 180-degree head snap. I know what's happened and I know what's about to come. So if we think about the principles of accelerated learning, there's 3 principles that I talk about. One is the reward is high value. The next one is the reward immediately follows the behavior, and that the behavior is rewarded consistently. Now, this is the process of accelerated learning. This is how I train a new behavior in the dog. Once the dog's trained in a behavior, then we go into maintenance. But if we want to teach the dog something, then we use these principles. And the first one is high value. If we use a high value reward when we train something, particularly early in the training process, it will increase the learning potential. It will make learning happen a lot quicker. And obviously we want that reinforcer to immediately follow a behavior, which again is why I like the mark, because the mark can be used immediately the behavior happens. I'm not waiting for a direct reward. I'm not waiting to actually throw that reward into the source or the point of when the behavior has happened. I can mark it straight away. So you should reward the marker each time it is used. And again, there is research in that. If we don't, we can end up extinguishing the marker and diluting it. And it goes back to, someone saying yes every time you talk to them, but their marker with the dog stood there and the marker is the yes word. We dilute it. We make it mean not so much. So if we inadvertently use the marker, we have to reward that. We can't dilute the reward. The marker, it must be as strong as when that dog spins 180 degrees. However, we don't have to reward the mark which is done by mistake with its high value reward. And this is where variable rewards come into the training process, or it is part of how it can assist. What I mean by that is, if, for instance, I've got the clicker in my hand and I inadvertently make a click happen because I stumbled as I'm trying to walk, or I'm trying to grab a piece of treat out of my pocket and the click happens. The dog hears the click and spins around and thinks, okay, I did something, I'm getting a reward. Well, I can't not reward the dog at that point. I have to reward the dog because the marker happened. But all I can do is say, good boy, and give it a little pat on the head. Okay, carry on. The principle of accelerated learning says that the value of the reward has to be high. I've just given a very low value reward. It's a reward. It's not the one the dog necessarily wants, but it's a reward. But I haven't accelerated any learning. So whatever that dog was doing, and I clicked by mistake, I haven't reinforced it. The dog's forgotten about that a few seconds later because actually the reward wasn't worth the effort of remembering. And now I can make sure that I actually mark at the correct time and I reinforce with a high value reward and I reinforce the correct behavior. So reward selection. I've mentioned this a couple of times, and this is extremely important in my training process because accelerated learning tells us, and I'll show the videos again in a second, accelerated learning tells us that a high value reward will accelerate learning. It will make learning happen quicker. But we don't know what the dog finds rewarding. The dog knows what the dog finds rewarding, so we have to ask the dog. And that's where the reward selection process comes in. And for those interested that haven't seen my presentations before or haven't done reward selection, on my website, and there will be the web address at the end of this presentation, there is a free webinar that explains how and why I do the reward selection process. But right now I'm going to show you a video as an example. And those that were on the All Clear seminar recently in Poland will have already seen this. But this is Adele. Adele is a Malinois, 3-year-old Malinois that I received from a trainer. She was being trained as a detection dog. She'd been trained using the red Kong, and the trainer just could not get beyond the basic training process with her. He had a lot of problems in motivating her to actually work. So I took Adele, and the first thing I did was clicker train, but also we did this reward selection exercise. Now, we'd been told that her primary toy that she loves is a red Kong. So within the process, we included a red Kong. But this is filmed as it happened. This is the first process that we went through of reward selection with her, the first time that we did it. And we're actually filming it as it happened. So there's a variety of rewards in the first video available to Adele. One of them is a red Kong, which we're told is her favorite toy. So we allow her to go and choose her favorite toy. And she doesn't choose a red Kong. She goes all over the red Kong. She nudges it with her nose. She has zero interest in the red Kong. So we reduce the amount of toys based on her initial selections. So now we're down to these toys. And again, the red Kong is sat there. Zero interest. And again. Even when there's 3 toys which aren't really her favorite, she chose to pick up that orange ball. Never interacted with a red Kong. So we actually repeated this exercise and we introduced tug toys as well. And she ended up being a tug dog, a soft, a bite pillow. Hopefully you know what that is, but basically a soft sausage that we can tug with. And that is her favorite toy. And she's gone on to complete her training. She's currently at Texas Tech University doing research. Dr. Nathan Hall says she's doing amazing in that research trial, and she'll be coming back to me next month. So that dog was being held back by the reward selection process not being done with her, by her being forced to be trained with a toy that actually she didn't like. She gets no enjoyment out of it, and therefore, why work? I get something I don't really enjoy. By changing that, we was able to tap into her desire to learn, and we was able to teach her to be a very effective detection dog. So reward selection is a very powerful tool that you should do when you start training a dog, like within the first few days, following the protocols that are in my webinar, because there are protocols for this, but then also repeat this throughout the training process, because dogs' choices change. Their interactions with the toy changes. They can get bored of a toy. And if we want to stay on top of accelerated learning, we want to make sure we're using the toy they like at that moment. So about once a month, repeat this. Takes 10, 15, maybe minutes, but the advantage, the training advantage that you receive from using a toy that dog enjoys is immense. It can't be understated. So please, if you haven't, do a reward selection and repeat it often. We also use variable rewards with the marker. So again, this is a bell. In this case, the marker, we're just using some food, and you can see it's black. So we're using a low value reward in this case because we want lots of repetitions of this behavior. Now we introduce a mid-range toy into that training cycle. And the reason we use a mid-range is because if she receives her tug pillow, she gets over aroused, and we have a lot of difficulty in actually training her, keeping her mind balanced and want to train. So we use the mid-range, the secondary or the third favorite toy for training. And then at the end of the training cycle, we would use the pillow as the very last reward, as the jackpot. So the jackpot isn't used all the time during this training cycle. Particularly in maintenance, it's used at the very end. To maintain a level balance, a dog's mind to learn, we actually use a lower value reward, as you saw. All right, some examples then of using markers in the field. And the top right photograph is me. I'm imprinting my dog Poppy on an endangered toad called the Wyoming toad. This is done in the field because there are no toads that we can utilize in captivity. They are being bred in a biosecure area. That means no dogs are allowed in that area. No people without a permit are allowed. So the only imprinting we could do is in the field. The toad is there, bottom left, cute little fellow. That is the Wyoming toad, and it only exists in one area in the world, and that is the area you can see in the photograph. So in this case, I had to imprint Poppy very quickly on a toad in the field. The other thing is we are only allowed 3 sniffs. Poppy is only allowed to sniff that toad 3 times, and then it has to be released because they don't want to stress the toad out and interrupt any breeding that it might do, or stress the toad out and make it sick. So when I taught Poppy that when she sniffs something in a mason jar, that is the glass jar, and I click, that is her new target. So she knows the correct behavior is to put her nose into that presented jar, sniff, and she will receive a click and get a reward. And I do this 3 times. And we did this 3 times throughout the course of the day. So she got 3 sniffs. Then we released that toad, went and found another toad. Later in the day, 3 sniffs, released that toad, found another toad, 3 sniffs. So 9 times she smelt that toad in that jar. 9 times she received the clicker, which, as you saw on the lineup, I showed how powerful that clicker is, that marker is to Poppy. At the end of this day, the day that photograph was taken on the top right, I'm walking back towards the vehicle. Poppy aired up and moved to the right-hand side of us and actually responded on one of those toads in the environment. That's how fast the process happened, but that is because the power of the marker meant something to Poppy, and it really reinforced quick. The dopamine was reinforced. I did use jackpot on the 3rd sniff. So I'm really reinforcing that smell meant something through use of the clicker and therefore use of the jackpot in this case. Another example is hatchling detection of iguanas on the island of Anegada in the British Virgin Islands. So I am going to show a video clip in the top video. This is dog Peña, who's an iguana detection dog. She was trained in Texas in my training lab, but I don't have iguana hatchlings in my training lab. They only exist on this island in Anegada. That's the only place legally that these particular type of iguana live in the world. So to train Peña, what I did was I developed a device, which I'll show in a moment, which allows us when we get to the island to place hatchlings inside so I can imprint Peña on the hatchling smell. But again, I trained her on the clicker. I trained her on the importance of the clicker and the mark, and then I used the marker to actually train her, one, in the process of how to use the device in Texas. And then I take the device to Anegada, which is the bottom video, and I'll show you how I imprint her on the actual hatchlings on the island. So here is the device. It's PVC tube. It has an opening, which allows me to put a target in. In this case, it's COM. So when it's a positive target, she's to push her nose forward. She receives a click. When no target is present, she moves away, she receives a click, and she gets a reward. There. Again, I'm using markers to tell her that is the correct behavior. So we'll watch again, but I won't talk so you can hear. All right, so the dog now understands the game. She knows when I smell my target, and in this case, in the lab, it's pieces of COM. Then I push forward, and when I don't smell it, I move backwards. So now I took those devices to Anegada, the island, and inside one of these tubes against the wall is a hatchling of an iguana. An iguana is a small reptile. I should have said that. Well, it's small when it's born. It grows to the size of a small dog once it's adult. So I then use the same process that I used in the lab, except there's an iguana inside the tube. When she puts her nose to the tube, I click on sniff, and then I start to delay and wait for a response. So I transfer the odor of iguana hatchling as now being target. So in this video, there is a hatchling inside one of the tubes, and I'm filming off my phone, so I apologize for the movement. She gives the response, and I mark with a clicker the correct behavior. Now, on the day that video was taken, the bottom video on the island, I'd finished the imprint process. I was happy she understood what the odor smelled like. I took her out into the environment and did a survey with her. And on the first day, we found an iguana hatchling about 4 foot high in a bush. She ate up, she took me forward, she gave a response, a stare response, and I could see the hatchling sat on a branch, and we was able to capture it. And we capture the hatchlings, or the biologists do, so they can be raised in a captive environment away from predators like cats, so they can survive to adult size, and then they're re-released. So here's a video of shaping a behavior. This is Bessie. Bessie came to us from a federal program, and we want Bessie to actually hold her nose inside this port eventually for 6 seconds. But this is part of the shaping process I'm using, and I'm using markers to help her learn. So she puts her nose in the port, she gets a click. So I'm only marking when she actually holds her nose in the port. And I'm not worried about her doing this other behaviors. Doesn't matter, because nothing else in that room will make the click happen. So she'll very quickly learn the only thing that makes the click happen is that putting my nose into that pipe. And as soon as she realizes that, it'll happen quicker and quicker. And you can see the shaping that I'm doing. I'm actually shaping the behavior to the final desired response, which is nose inside the port and hold for duration. So she's bringing her nose out, no click happens. Yeah, that's not going to make the click happen, so I'm waiting. Again, shaping that behavior. And you could see how difficult this would be if I was direct rewarded, if I was throwing the reward at source. Near impossible to actually shape this behavior so quick. And again, this is live. You know, this isn't set up. This is a training problem I had, and I'm actually filming live how I'm resolving this problem. And again, Bessie is currently up at Texas Tech with Dr. Nathan Hall, doing research project on the olfactometer. She went through this training with no problems. Okay, so quickly going to go over the progression plan of how I imprint a new target using the marker. And this is how I do it all the time. So in step 1, mark on sniff, mark on sniff, mark on sniff. So I do it 3 times. As soon as the dog sniffs something, I click. Step 2, mark on sniff, and then I wait for a basic response, depending on whatever the final response is. And those that follow my workbook know that I train the response before the odor. So at this point, the dog already knows what response is, whether that's a down, stand and stare, a sit, it doesn't matter. But in this case, as soon as the dog gives the sit, I would click. And then on step 3, I mark on sniff. Then I wait for a response, which is as soon as you sit. And then the third time, I mark on the full response, which is sit, stare, and maybe for 3 seconds. So this is how I imprint all the time. This is the process I follow. And this works for me because I do use markers, and that I charge the markers, and then I use variable rewards during this process from the reward selection exercise, obviously. And here is Bessie, I think it's Bessie, doing exactly that process. Yep, it's Bessie. So this is a brand new odor that she's never encountered before. This is her target. And we are imprinting in this video. So that was a click on sniff. And then following that process, we go to an intermediate response, as you just saw, and then we wait for a delayed response. Okay, so that's been 50 minutes. That gives us 10 minutes for questions. I'm happy to stay longer if people want me to. There is my website there. If you go on the website, then there's a link there for the online portion of the website where the free seminar for reward selection is. Instagram, I post a lot and I show a lot of videos. In fact, I posted today about reward selection and how we've done it with our group of dogs, just as a refresher for people. But I post reward selection. You can see us all the time using markers and sometimes using direct reward, depending what the actual training session is. So Instagram has a lot of little video clips of these training techniques that I talk about, and there is my email if needed. But at this point, I'm happy for Yagna to take over and then field any questions to me.
Okay, thank you very much, Paul, for your presentation and for taking time to give it to us. Jeśli macie jakieś pytania, to możecie je teraz zadać. So if you have, because we also have 2 participants from Germany, so I will also try to speak English. If you have any questions, Kathleen, please, this is the time. Otherwise, if you have any questions later on, you can still ask them. Jeżeli będziecie mieli później, wam się pojawią jakieś pytania, to też oczywiście możecie je przesłać i zadać. No one is typing anything, so I guess there are no questions. Everything was clear.
Okay.
Okay, then. So I also said that if they have any questions later on, yeah, you heard that. I said that in English too. Then they can also send them in. Otherwise, if everything is clear, then thank you, Paul, again for your time. Thank you for going through your presentation again.
All right. Yeah. Thank you very much. Hopefully people understand the importance of reward selection and making sure the dogs choose its favorite reward. Don't just pick up a Kong and say that's it. And hopefully people understand the power of a marker if it is bridge, charged, whatever you want to call it correctly, and made into a powerful tool that you can use, and the importance of it, and how you can make mistakes and dilute that marker and not make it as effective. So as you saw, and you see in my videos, I use markers a lot. I do use direct reward also, but the reward markers definitely accelerate learning. So they are an important tool that you should follow. And again, those that have heard me speak previously with presentations, it's the 1% rule. Each one of these little techniques, whether it's reward selection, make sure the dog chooses the reward it likes, whether it's using or charging the marker correctly and make sure it's powerful, and then moving forward to the all clears and make sure odor communication is clear. All these are 1% rules from Atomic Habits, which the book Atomic Habits, which actually increase the standard of your dog. And if you do this, the end result would be so much better than if you're just trying to struggle along with unclear communication. So, I keep stressing this, and people watch my video and say, well, how can I train a dog like this? That's it. Just, there's no secret. It's just use the dog, or let the dog choose the best toys that it likes. And then you use the tools that are available to actually guide the dog through the training process, and it'll go a lot easier. But thank you for your time. Thank you everyone for joining us today or on the recording. I appreciate it, and I appreciate your support in actually allowing me to join you. And
it's us who appreciate your participation here. So thank you so much for being a part of this course.
Okay.
Okay. Have a great day then, and I'll speak to you soon.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Oh, wait, someone is typing. Maybe there is a question coming, or maybe just a bye-bye. Let's wait a second. Bye-bye. Oh. Okay, so Aga wrote that as usual, very interesting, but she will wait for the full translation.
Okay.
All
right. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and I'll speak to you soon. Ciao.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Dzięki wszystkim i do usłyszenia na kolejnych webinarach.